Jose Malena. So, on a very sunny morning in 2012, 62-year-old Jose Malena woke up ready and recharged to head to work. Malena arrived at the Bumblebee factory, probably thinking, just another day at the office. Little did he know, he was about to become the most famous sardine in the can. This was because this factory used a 35-foot-long pressure cooker to sterilize tons of tuna. That's literally the length of a school bus. Well, as the man started his daily routine maintenance, he crawled inside the oven to clean it when a coworker, totally clueless that the man was inside, loaded it up with 6 tons of tuna and started the cooking process. The cooker was turned up to 270 degrees Fahrenheit with the man and fish trapped inside for the entire cooking cycle, which was a whopping 2 hours. Just imagine being trapped inside a hot oven set to the highest for 2 whole hours. Your blood and every single fluid inside your body would literally be at a boiling point while your flesh slowly sizzles and melts away from your body. Needless to say, the entire ordeal would have been horror personified for Malena. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, feeling the heat at work, doesn't it? Now, you might be thinking, surely someone noticed he was missing. Well, apparently his coworkers thought he had gone out for a quick lunch break, but unfortunately Jose was busy pretty much becoming lunch himself. It wasn't until after the cooking cycle had ended when they went to retrieve the tuna that they discovered the tragic mistake. Jose's melted flesh was the only thing left of him. Tito Morales. Have you ever seen one of those movies where you're in an elevator and it suddenly stops working and people are panicking? Soon, some smart guy crawls out of the access hatch and gets to safety. This always seems to work in most movies, but sadly, this movie's plot took a complete U-turn when it came to 20-year-old Tito Morales. This sad incident happened in 2014 when the young man was heading out to a store after visiting his girlfriend in her apartment building. As he was riding in the elevator, it suddenly stopped, and of course, the doors didn't slide open. Instead of taking out his phone and calling for help, or maybe even hitting the emergency button on the elevator, Morales decided to unleash his inner Spider-Man. He used the access hatch at the top of the elevator to climb out, attempting to open the exterior doors to one of the floors, thinking he was in a real-life escape room. Unfortunately, just as Tito was playing Spider-Man, the elevator decided it wasn't done with its job and started moving again. Now, you'd think our hero would climb back inside and press the emergency button, right? Wrong. Tito decided to take his adventure to the next level, literally. He tried to jump onto the next elevator coming up, but surprise, surprise, he miscalculated and lost his footing. So instead of a smooth superhero landing, Tito found himself trapped between the elevator and the shaft wall, which essentially turned him into a human sandwich. Tito was unable to breathe for hours, and sadly, his lifeless body was the only thing that was pulled out. Francis Daniel Brome. So, Francis Daniel Brome and his best friend, John Hutcherson, had a yearly tradition that involved hitting up their local bar, drinking like it was the end of Prohibition, and having a blast. One night in 2004, they got ready for their annual drink and meet, but things got really out of hand this time. After drinking enough to make a fish jealous, the dynamic duo decided to ignore the option of calling an Uber or Lyft like sensible drunks. Instead, they thought hitting the road completely wasted would be a brilliant idea. Because, bad decisions are the cornerstone of every epic fail story. Well, Hutcherson took the wheel and Brome played the part of the passenger princess, merrily sticking his head and arms out of the window like he was living his best drunk Disney princess life. But this tale doesn't end happily ever after. Hutcherson, proving that drunk driving is never a good idea, lost control of the car. It swerved off the road and hit one of those wires that support telephone poles. The wire, clearly not in the mood for games, snapped up from the ground and went straight for Brome's head, which was still hanging out of the window. It cleanly decapitated him. Yep, like a scene out of a Final Destination movie. But here's where it gets even more surreal. Hutcherson, too drunk to notice that his best buddy was now missing a rather important body part, continued driving for another 12 miles. He parked, stumbled into his house, and went straight to bed, blissfully unaware that his friend was now headless in the car. Like, how drunk are you that you couldn't even notice the headless body hanging out your window? Forget that! How don't you even remember your best friend? Well, the next morning, the obviously very shocked neighbors spotted the headless corpse in the car and called the police. He was arrested and charged with drinking under the influence. Daniel Hill. Daniel Hill was a 54-year-old working as a technician at a tube and pipe manufacturing company. It had not even been a year since he started working there when he left not just the company, but the world, and in the most horrific way. On that fateful day, Daniel was doing his technician duties, moving around, fixing and tightening all those loose bolts and screws. Just another day at the office, right? But fate had other plans for him. As he was making his rounds, he tripped and fell into a large open tank of 160-degree sulfuric acid solution. This wasn't your average hot tub, it was the company's very acidic, dangerous method for strengthening pipes. Now the thing is, sulfuric acid is so potent, it's nicknamed the king of chemicals, and it is capable of dissolving other acids. Imagine a single drop of this stuff touching your skin. It would burn so intensely because it rapidly breaks down your skin, muscles, and bones. It's like having something voraciously eating away at your flesh. Now picture Daniel Hill's agony when he fell into this tank of extremely hot sulfuric acid. He was submerged in it for a few minutes before his coworkers, risking serious burns themselves, managed to drag him out. Daniel suffered extreme burns throughout his body and was rushed to the nearest hospital to get treatment. Sadly, he succumbed to his injuries after 11 hours of battling for his life. Saman Kundurura. Just imagine you recently lost your mother and traveled all the way home for the funeral arrangements and burial. Well, that's all pretty normal, right? Unfortunately for 40-year-old Saman Kundurura, this simple normal tradition took a turn for the worst very, very fast. You see, it all happened on June 15, 2018, while Kundurura was attending his mother's funeral in Sulawesi, Indonesia. So the tradition in his area is that the family members of the deceased would carry her coffin with the dead body inside to a decorated funeral tower that is about 10 meters high. This is the equivalent to a 3-story building. Now get this, instead of strong wooden stairs, they were climbing a freaking bamboo ladder with the corpse and coffin. Because nothing says safe passage to the afterlife like a do-it-yourself jungle gym, right? However, the ladder obviously couldn't carry all the weight of the people walking on it, the corpse, and the coffin all at once, so it caved in, falling like a house of cards. And suddenly, everyone was getting a crash course in gravity, including Mom and her coffin. It was raining men, and one very unfortunate woman in a box. The coffin fell out of their hands, did a few somersaults in the air, and wham! The coffin struck Saman Kundurura on the head. He landed on the floor with a fatal injury on his head and was declared dead as soon as he was rushed to the hospital. In a sick twist of events, the man who came home strong and healthy to bury his dead mother was literally killed and buried right beside her within 48 hours. Talk about a family reunion gone horribly wrong. Isadora Duncan. Picture this. It is September 14th, 1927, and 50-year-old Isadora Duncan decided to drive around town in her new flashy convertible. Well, the free-spirited Isadora, dressed in her usual flamboyant style with a long, flowing silk scarf wrapped around her neck, entered the car and bid her friends goodbye. As she was driving, the trailing end of her scarf, fluttering outside the vehicle like a banner of freedom, suddenly got caught in the car's rear wheel. So as the car drove forward, the scarf just kept getting tangled and squeezing tightly around her neck. The scarf, now playing the role of the villain, powerfully pulled her head backwards, and the force snapped her head backwards, and her neck broke like a twig in a dry, sunny desert. Well, she died instantly. The scariest part of this tragic story was that before Isadora drove off, she literally said, "Goodbye, my friends, I am off to glory." Jesus Contreras Benitez. If you were working as a tree trimmer, then you'd be familiar with how dangerous some of the equipment is. And unfortunately, a certain Mexican immigrant called Jesus Contreras Benitez found out in a quite horrific manner just how dangerous the equipment is. On October 11th, 2022, Benitez and his crew were dispatched to handle the task. His specific job was to load the tree branches and trunks into a wood chipper, a a machine that can only be described as the mechanical equivalent of a giant kitchen blender, but designed to turn wood into chips instead of making smoothies. Although Benitez had been operating this machine for a while, feeding it large pieces of wood to break down into smaller chips with its sharp, powerful rotating blades, something went horribly wrong on this day, and in an instant, Benitez somehow lost his footing or got too close, and the unforgiving wood chipper pulled him in. Just imagine being thrown into a machine with blades so strong and sharp enough to cut through thick trunks of trees. Well, the whole place was suddenly a pool of ground beef flesh, gushing blood, crushed bones, and brain matter. The exact details of how he fell in aren't clear, but these accidents can happen in a split second, like slipping on a wet floor, but with far more catastrophic consequences. Kaiser Carlisle. We can all agree that accidents happen all the time, but this particular freak accident would cause the tragic death of 9-year-old Kaiser Carlisle, who was just enjoying his days serving as a bat boy. In 2015, during the summer baseball game in Wichita, Kansas, Carlisle was doing what bat boys and girls do best, collecting falling bats and balls with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, as it turns out, this gig was about to become much more dangerous than being a crash test dummy for monster trucks. On this particular hot afternoon, Carlisle was diligently working near the team's dugout when a player in the on-deck circle, essentially the VIP lounge for bats, decided to swing for the fences. Unfortunately, his bat ended up swinging towards Carlisle instead. Now, while all the bat boys and girls must wear helmets while working, this didn't do anything to protect Carlisle, because the force of the baseball bat in full swing is approximately 10 times the impact of a hammer, but much faster. The blow shattered the helmet along with his fragile skull. He was immediately rushed to the hospital, but he died the next day due to severe head injuries. There are so many horrible ways people die every day, and if you want to stay updated on all the information and stories, please join our Discord server today. Suwan Laddie. Who would have thought that a termite infestation would be among the top worst ways to die in this day and time? Well, certainly not 54-year-old Suwan Laddie. You see, the man had a termite infestation at his home, so he decided to replace all the wood with a termite infestation single-handedly. As the proper handyman, Suwan decided to go full DIY warrior and replace all the infested wood. He had all his necessary tools ready and prepped for action. Nails? Check. Wood? Check. Termite repellent spray? Check. He even got an angle grinder, a power tool used for cutting, grinding, and polishing wood, iron, tiles, and scaffolding, which would help him reach the roof and higher places. The man was determined, and in his mind, nothing could possibly go wrong. After finishing the easy parts, it was time to tackle the wood beams. Suwan climbed his homemade scaffolding like a modern-day Jack and the Beanstalk, but unfortunately, in a moment that could have been ripped straight out of a horror movie, he slipped and accidentally knocked over the angle grinder. As he fell, the power tool landed right on him, slicing through his neck and throat, cutting deep into his chest and spraying blood and bone everywhere. Unfortunately, Suwan died on the scene after choking on his blood. Talk about a DIY gone wrong. Aura Garcia. One early afternoon on New Year's Eve in 2013, Aura Garcia was walking on the Meridian Street Bridge in East Boston to attend a doctor's appointment. Now, this particular bridge she was walking on was like one of those movable bridges, allowing boats to pass underneath like a transformer in disguise. So now, when she reached the intersection where the bridge usually split, a boat was trying to pass. Well, you can probably guess what happened after this. The bridge operator, probably daydreaming about New Year's Eve parties and resolutions they wouldn't keep, didn't notice our unfortunate pedestrian. Suddenly, Garcia found herself in a real-life game of the floor is lava, except in this version, the floor was actually disappearing. As the bridge began its impromptu yoga session, Garcia clung on like a cat to a curtain and started screaming for help. Finally, tuning into this unscheduled horror show, the operator tried to lower the bridge faster than you can say, oops. But in a twist that would make even the most sadistic game show host wince, this rescue attempt turned Garcia into a human panini. She was basically squished and flattened between the bridge plates, and it crushed her bones and organs. Eben Byers. Well, you already know that medicine in the medieval era was a mix of poison and a lot of trial and error, but one man who got the worst end of the pole was Eben Byers. Byers was a very wealthy industrialist and an amateur golf champion in the early 20th century, but he injured his arm in 1927 after falling from a railway couch. Now, instead of slapping on some ice and calling it a day, Eben's doctor prescribed him Radithor. It was the ultimate health craze, the supposed miracle elixir that could cure anything. Basically, it was water with a dash of radium in it. Yes, radium, the stuff that glows in the dark. Eben, being the overachiever that he was, didn't just sip this atomic cocktail. Oh no, he chugged it like a frat boy at his first beer keg. He was downing 3 bottles a day for 2 years. That's over 1,400 bottles of radioactive water. He'd have taken home the gold if there were an Olympic event for radium consumption. But alas, it turns out that drinking radioactive water isn't exactly good for you. By 1930, Eben started feeling a bit under the weather. And by a bit, I mean his teeth started falling out, his jaw developed necrosis, and his bones became so brittle they could have been mistaken for the aftermath of a cookie crumbling contest. Doctors were baffled at first, but soon realized Eben was practically glowing with radioactivity. He was suffering from severe radiation poisoning. His condition was so dire that, at the end, he had lost most of his jaw, parts of his skull, and had holes forming in his brain. It was like a bad sci-fi horror movie, except this was real life.